Hello and welcome everyone. We're ready to start and thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to see there's a large number of attendees on the line and we're honored that you were able to clear your schedule for this event. My name is Kim. I'm with the AIMMS marketing team and I'll be your host for the upcoming 45 minutes. Today's webinar is about 5 perceptions on demand forecasting and how it's changing. We have recently asked supply chain planning professionals about the ins and outs of their demand forecasting process, and my colleague Brian will share our findings with you. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Today's webinar will be around 45 minutes long. Your lines will be muted during the entire webinar. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your control panel. I'll take note of them and bring them up at the end of the presentation. You may also hold them until the end yourself, and we will process as many questions as time allows. All right, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce our presenter joining us live from the UK, Brian Dooley. Brian is a demand-driven thought leader and has spent more than 25 years in supply chain operations. Prior to joining AIMMS, he was head of supply chain design at British Telecom. Hello, Brian. How are you doing today?
Hi, Kim. Very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Very good. Are you ready to get started?
I certainly am.
All right. Well, without further ado, I hope you will all enjoy the webinar. And Brian, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I can see we've got well over 100 people online for this. So I think that in itself demonstrates kind of how important demand forecasting is. And that's certainly something that came across very strongly in our survey. What I plan to do for the next kind of 30 minutes or so, and leaving sufficient space at the end for questions, is to go through the findings from our survey. So our survey was 20 questions. We had just over 300 people respond to that. That was about 65% in supply chain roles, and the rest kind of split around finance, commercial, sales, and pretty much an even split across the geographies: North America, Asia Pacific, and Europe. So a real broad spectrum of professionals and geographies. And really the purpose of the survey, and we've done this once before with network design and found it really useful and insightful, is to really get a sense for what are the challenges people are wrestling with out there, what's the perceptions around current approaches, technologies, solutions, and really what are people striving to achieve. So what we're going to look at today, or try and answer, draw out from the survey results, is kind of looking at the process. So who typically is responsible for the forecasting process and accountable for the results, the technologies that people are using around that, forecast accuracy. So what typical levels of forecast accuracy are people experiencing, and then a real interesting one actually is looking at product portfolios and how they're changing, and what those changes, what impact that has on demand forecasting. And then kind of given all of that, people's perceptions, insights on how demand forecasting is evolving, and then kind of pulling it all together at the end with a so what. So okay, given all of that really rich insight and content we've got, what are our thoughts on that in terms of what that means and what might be an approach to tackle it going forwards. So there's going to be quite a lot of charts. There's nothing really heavy content wise, and I'm going to talk through them all and draw out the key points, and yeah, then we can take questions right at the end. And the slightly amusing picture there, I put a typical clip art. That was Kim's version of that, but there's a serious point there. So I actually started my career as a demand forecaster, and I think the crystal ball analogy is probably a frustration, a metaphor that lots of people, if they're involved in demand forecasting, can relate to. Anyway, let's dive straight in. So we'll start with a real simple one. So how important is demand forecasting? And as I said, kind of no surprises here at all, really. Probably the most obvious chart to interpret. So clearly demand forecasting is perceived by pretty much everyone to be extremely important. We can see that by the number of respondents we had to the survey, the amount of you online today for the webinar. It's an extremely important element in the overall business planning process. So and kind of hang on to that thought as we kind of go through some of the other analysis. So then we started to drill into responsibilities and accountabilities. So who is responsible for managing the forecast process? And as you can see here, there's a clear leader in supply chain, and the little orange box other there. Most of the kind of job descriptions, role descriptions that were entered into there were pretty much mappable to supply chain as well. So typically this, demand forecasting is seen as a process that is managed by supply chain, which I think starts to already raise some questions around ownership and driving engagement with other areas of the business, which may be a frustration that some of you can relate to. And I think when we expand that to look at who's accountable for forecast accuracy as well, the picture changes slightly. So sales starts to become a little bit more prevalent in terms of who's accountable for the accuracy of forecasts, but it's still supply chain. And if you think that in the orange bar there, which is a mix of all of the functions, supply chain is going to have a role within that as well. And also the other category was a lot of typical supply chain roles, job descriptions. There's the same kind of pattern. So we're seeing that most organizations really are seeing demand forecasting as a supply chain process, and actually supply chain are accountable for it, which actually I don't necessarily agree with, from the ownership point of view, as already stated. But I think if you start to think about what is that demand forecast being used for in the rest of the business planning processes, I think the risk when supply chain is owning the process, and particularly the accountability for the accuracy, is there's going to be a temptation there to start to constrain that demand forecast against their knowledge of available supply or whatever. And so straight away, before we've even started any S&OP process, IBP, whatever it may be, we're already constraining our view of demand before we do anything else, which again I think is a risk from a business planning point of view. So that's responsible and accountable. We then kind of wanted to explore kind of frequency, level of granularity, and how the forecast is communicated. So I'll pull both of these up at the same time. The next couple of slides are exploring that. So in terms of frequency of review and granularity in terms of time buckets that the forecast is shared in, again, kind of what I expected as a result. So the vast majority, it's reviewed on a monthly basis, and it's shared in monthly buckets. I think what's interesting is kind of how prevalent weekly is, both in terms of review frequency and granularity of the forecast. And I guess if I was going to try and draw a conclusion from that, or provide some reason behind it, I guess that reflects the kind of level of volatility out there today with demand, and I guess people's attempt to try and respond to that in a more timely manner than just a pure monthly cycle, and generating forecasts in monthly buckets. And we'll see some more elements of that drawn out in some of the other questions. But I think that particular one around frequency and detail, no great surprises there. So then we wanted to look at, so how is the how is that forecast then communicated to the rest of the business? And so the first question we asked was about the level of detail. At what level is the forecast communicated at? And you can see here, lowest level of detail or aggregated at item level take us to over 50%. If you add into that there, product and location level, so skew, the vast majority of organizations are transmitting the forecast at a pretty low level of detail, and I guess that probably reflects the downstream planning processes, the systems that need to consume the forecast need it at a skew level. So that's probably why that's taking place. But I think it's interesting then so the next question we asked then was, given the level you transmit the forecast at, actually how do you transmit it? And we gave kind of three options there, either as just a single number, which, as you can see, the vast majority of organizations are just transmitting a single number, or two options around, do you provide either some sort of scenario, so maybe multiple versions of the forecast, and I was quite surprised at how low that was actually, or as a range for each item in the forecast. And we're going to come on and look at forecast accuracy later on, but I think we'll all happily acknowledge that the one thing we can guarantee with forecasts is that they're going to be wrong. So it's quite interesting that we still only transmit a single number that's then used by all of the downstream planning processes to plan against, to commit resources against, to make or buy product. And quite surprising really that very few organizations are either transmitting scenarios or a range. And I guess part of that could be driven by the technology solutions and potentially is a consequence of the fact that we're transmitting our forecast at this really low level of detail. Probably makes it a challenge to manage multiple scenarios or ranges of forecasts at each item. So again, I think quite interesting. We'll see kind of how that comes together towards the end. So staying on that technology theme, where we moved to then was asking some questions around what technology are people using to generate their demand forecasts. And one of these days we'll have one of these charts that doesn't have spreadsheets as the predominant technology used for supply chain planning, but right now that is still, surprisingly or probably unsurprisingly, the prevalent technology. And for me, the surprising result here was really how few are using a specialist forecasting package. And I think if you reflect on that opening question of how important is demand forecasting in your overall business planning process, and that was a clear, right over the right hand side of the graph in the extremely important, 40% are still using spreadsheets, and there doesn't seem to be huge appetite to invest in specialist packages. So and then kind of to complete that, we balanced it with so kind of rate your satisfaction with the current solution. And I guess here, given the prevalence with spreadsheets, it's probably not surprising that there's really just a general kind of indifference around how satisfied people are. Nobody is particularly shouting from the rooftops about how great their forecasting package is, and probably more dissatisfied than satisfied. And then what we were able to do was kind of drill into the detail behind this, just to go, well, okay, let's let those three spreadsheets, ERP or specialist package, how is that satisfaction split across those? And I guess there it's probably a more obvious answer. So spreadsheets, clearly are not a robust, sustainable way to plan your business. So there's high dissatisfaction or indifference. ERP kind of somewhere in the middle, and of those that are using a specialist solution, the majority are satisfied, but that's still only at 60%, which given the the investment into the technology is probably still on the relatively low side. And it's kind of, okay, so what's driving all of that? So the next sort of logical area to drill into then was some questions around forecast accuracy. So the first one was, how satisfied are you with the accuracy of your demand forecast? And you'll probably recognize that's an extremely similar chart to the how satisfied are you with your current technology solution, which I think kind of says that, you know, the main criteria around satisfaction is really related to forecast accuracy, and this is going to be a theme that comes out in some of the other more detailed questions. Is this almost blinkered obsession with trying to achieve ever improving forecast accuracy? So we drilled into this in a little bit more detail with some of the other questions then to try and get a sense of, well, okay, what's typical levels of forecast accuracy, you know, down at the item level. And what we didn't do here, to not overcomplicate the question, was kind of introduce lead time offsets or anything like that. So any of you who are kind of, you know, involved in the demand forecasting process will you know, probably measure your forecast accuracy at some sort of offset that reflects the lead time. This was just a fairly open statement with 4 categories for people to select, and kind of 0 to 20%. I'd argue from my experience, most of those are probably towards the 20% end at item level is kind of, even this day and age, is still classed as sort of world-class forecast accuracy performance. Vast majority in the 20 to 40% forecast error level, which you know, is really quite sobering when you think, you know, again, back to that question 1, how important we feel the process is, you know, and the rest of our downstream plans in supply chain are based on this forecast that's, you know, got an error in the range of 20 to 40%. So we propagate that error right the way through the rest of the supply chain as a result of planning against that forecast number. You know, I'm not sure any other business planning process where we do that and, you know, consider it acceptable. And the other question we asked here was, well, okay, so that's where the forecast error sits. What does that mean, or what do you use that forecast error for, if at all? Do you use it in your inventory calculations? So thinking here as, you know, input into safety stock calculations. And I was really actually quite surprised by the result here. I expected the yes to be significantly higher, and particularly when we look at the answers to some of the later questions in the survey. So, you know, only just over half of the 300 or so people that responded actually do anything with that forecast error in terms of incorporating that into their stock targets, which I think is really interesting. So given how big the error is, we then ask some questions then, say, well, okay, if forecast accuracy could improve, you know, how important is that, and what are the benefits? So again, no real surprise in this chart. How important is it for your organization to improve forecast accuracy? Yeah, I'd like to speak to the 1% down at the not important at all. Clearly they're more than happy with their accuracy, but the vast majority, this is a really important issue, looking at how to improve forecast accuracy. And as I said, you know, there's almost a blinkered obsession with this out there. And when we asked about, you know, what are the benefits to be gotten from that, I think you're almost seeing the symptoms of high forecast error. So the first one, or the first two really, you know, reduced inventory holding and better customer service, that's really coming out of the feast and famine situation that's created by forecast error. So where we've over forecast an item, we end up with too much stock. Where we've under forecast at an item level, we can end up with service issues, or the consequences more expediting, or we continually break into our production plans, our purchasing plans, so we don't have stable reliable supply chain plans. And so these really are, the symptoms. So there's clearly recognition that, we need to improve forecast accuracy. And if we improve forecast accuracy, all of these problems we have to deal with as supply chain professionals will disappear. And I think the two on the end I added into the questionnaire because, again, it's something I believe in quite strongly. So I think, one of the challenges as supply chain professionals we have is because of the inaccuracy in forecasts, it really hampers the engagement and the buy-in we can get from other stakeholders in the business. So if we can find a way to sort of to solve this problem, then actually we get more predictable financials then in terms of revenue, expedite related expense, projected inventory levels, which drives, much improved cross-functional collaboration between all the departments. So that's kind of accuracy and benefits, and kind of bringing the survey to a close. Then we wanted to look at, well, okay, so what's changing with product portfolios, the market, what impact is that going to have on demand forecasting going forwards? And so we asked a series of questions, and again, probably not surprising, a lot of these answers, but it's really reassuring to get it confirmed by such a large group of respondents. So the number of items is increasing. Product churn is increasing. So we've got more items. We're turning them faster. Only a small percentage see portfolios staying the same or actually shrinking. So all of this says the complexity that we're having to deal with, and probably the volatility related to that is only increasing. And we kind of wanted to drill into that in a bit more detail. So this question was then looking at, what do you expect the growth rate in numbers of items to be in comparison to the growth rate in the volume of sales? And kind of the reason we asked this, so that chart on the right there, if my number of items is growing faster than my sales volume, then clearly the volume per item is reducing, which from a statistics point of view, a forecasting point of view, makes generating a forecast even more of a challenge. So again, 41%, so the majority reckon we'll be seeing the scenario depicted there. So my average volume per item reducing. At best, it's going to stay as bad as it is now, and there's a lucky 24% that actually think this aspect may improve. So given that, so there's kind of a picture emerging there that it's actually quite hard now, and our forecast accuracy reflects that, but actually it's getting more complicated given what's happening with product portfolios over the coming years. The final bit we wanted to explore then was, okay, what techniques are people using now, and what are they interested in going forward? So where do they see potential solution areas to address some of this challenge? So in terms of techniques that people are using now, so statistical modeling of historical demand is the standout one. So I guess that's been the solution since the year dot, really. That's where I started my supply chain career 25 years ago. And quite a few of these other techniques apply to this. So best fit functionality goes hand in hand with it. Interesting that's so low. So that suggests there's still a lot of demand planners out of there that are having to do an awful lot of model maintenance and manipulation to their statistical models, and not getting any assistance from the technology. But I think the interesting one was machine learning on the end here. So there's we hear a lot of hype around machine learning, but right now very few people are actually exploiting it. So we then kind of flipped that on its head and said, well, okay, what are you actively investigating? What are you what are you curious about? And interestingly here, it's now machine learning suddenly leaps up, and also demand sensing as well. And I guess there it's the sort of, we're desperately looking for how to solve this challenge with volatility and complexity. So demand sensing sounds like that's something that might be quite interesting, and all of the technology and vendor hype around machine learning sounds quite interesting as well. The other subtle thing that came out here though was so you may or may not have picked up on each slide, there's the stats at the top of how many answered and how many skipped the question. And on pretty much all of the other charts, it's 290 odd and 2 or 3 skip the question. In both of these two, there was a marked difference in the amount of people that skipped the question, which I don't know, that suggests that actually there's a real lack of understanding around techniques and how they actually work and how they can be applied and deployed successfully. And so people just didn't feel like they were in a position to answer those questions. So I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So that's kind of the chart. So I just kind of wanted to summarize all of that before sort of giving my take on what do I think that means and potential ways to address it. So it's important, state the obvious really, but that first slide, demand forecasting is not an unimportant business process. I still think it's too much of a supply chain job. So it's still seen as, something that supply chain do, and are slightly annoying about it. 77%, focus at the SKU level. And I wonder, is that a cause of why demand forecasting is seen as a supply chain role? Because it's at that level of granularity and detail. Most are still only issuing it as one set of numbers. Excel is the dominant technology. Less than a third are using a specialist package, and kind of there's indifference around current technology and levels of accuracy. So we've got solutions, but we're not really, nobody's shouting from the rooftops around how great they are, or they feel they're addressing the problem. And most are using statistical modeling of history. But on that last slide, machine learning, it's the least used technique, but one of the most investigated ones. And it kind of feels like it's just that, we're in this, trapped in this problem, and we're looking for some sort of magic bullet. And so given all of that, we still, improving forecast accuracy is still seen as, extremely important. So despite how difficult it is, it's still a big area of focus, really driven out of, we want to move away from feast and famine, so reduce our inventory whilst improving service at the same time, reduce unnecessary expediting, and get some stability into our supply chain plans. But we're trying to do that with solutions we're not happy with, and in a world where number of items is increasing, rate of churn is increasing, and actually those items are growing faster than sales. So my slow moving items are growing as well. So everything is it's getting more difficult to forecast. Sorry guys, not the solution you were probably wanting to hear. And so before I kind of close with some suggestions on how that can be addressed, there's 2 final charts really that I wanted to kind of pull out, which I think for me just sums up demand forecasting for the last 25 years. Nothing's really changed. And I've said this is we're living in hope whilst looking for an alternative. So that pie chart there, so given everything we've just heard, the solutions I've got are not great. It's getting more difficult to forecast. Looking at all of these techniques, 61% think that forecast accuracy is going to improve over the next 3 to 5 years. Well, I'd have one simple question to that: how exactly? Because we haven't seen any evidence in any of the insight from the rest of the questions that were answered. So I just found that really, really quite contradictory, and I think quite reflective of, as supply chain professionals, we're just, there's all of these promises from technology. It must surely just get better tomorrow. But as I say, I've been in the space for 25 years, and that's been a hope for the 25 years. And so this final question we asked then was around, so okay, how curious are people around new techniques? So rather than constantly trying to improve forecast accuracy, how curious are you about new techniques? Is there a different way? And this was almost as stark as that importance in improving forecast accuracy graph. So there's a lot of curiosity out there as to there surely must be a different way to doing this, because the world has not changed really or improved over the last kind of 25 years. So what are my thoughts on potential solution areas? Just conscious looking at the clock there, and for me this is kind of there's a turning point here where we have to kind of say we can't just keep hoping forecast accuracy will improve, or there'll be some whiz-bang solution that will come along and give us really accurate forecasts at a SKU level. I think given what we've seen with where portfolios are moving to, that's becoming more and more an impossible dream, and we have to look for a slightly more innovative approach. So I'm sure most people have heard the expression VUCA, so volatility, unpredictability, complexity, and ambiguity. That is the new world that we live in. So I don't know how many people recognize the core model from Gartner. So this is, and I think this is a really useful model for, and the reason I'm using it for positioning where does forecasting, or where should it fit in my view. So at that configure and optimize level there, it's about resilience in the plan versus down at respond and execute. This is all about accuracy down there. And if you think configure and optimize configure is about what's my supply chain footprint look like, where do I need to put capacity, when do I turn it on, turn it off. The optimize level is about balancing demand and supply. How do I optimize that given the constraints that I've got? And then respond and execute then really is, how do I now gain visibility into what's happening on a daily basis and respond to that changing demand, at the detail, at the SKU level. And I think it's a really useful model to position where might forecasting have a better fit. So my argument is actually forecasting really sits in that top bit in the configure and optimize. We should be using it to, managing it at an aggregate level, using it to set, the capacity that we need in the supply chain to support the demand we expect to get. Let's use new technology, let's use machine learning. At that aggregate level, it can be incredibly powerful to do the heavy lifting for us, pick the right models, fine tune those on a monthly basis, create the space for us to, not get bogged down in data analysis and add the real insight. And actually at that slightly more aggregate level, that's a more natural level to engage with other areas of the business. So I think it helps address that issue. And then, at the respond and execute level, I think we need to look at alternatives here. How do we decouple from that forecast that we know is wrong, but at an aggregate level gets more and more accurate, so we can use to set overall capacity, and then look at more pull-based approaches. So DDMRP, full disclosure, this is something I did when I was at British Telecom with great success. It's really, really powerful to allow you to really, sense and respond to changes in demand in real time, but set those buffers based on the forecast that's been done at the upper level, and then S&OP becomes the glue or the link then that joins both of those two pieces together. And I think really everything we saw from the survey confirms that now really is the time. We can't just keep living in hope that there's going to be some magic bullet that fixes forecast accuracy down at the SKU level. So from an AIMMS point of view, we have S&OP. as a solution, and we're about to launch our demand forecasting solution, and it's very deliberately positioned to support at that configure and optimize level. The purpose of this webinar is not to look at product, it's to share the feedback and the insight from the survey. But please, connect with me, reach out to me if you'd like to hear more or understand more about what we're doing at AIMMS to start to enable this slightly different approach. And with that, Kim, apologies, I've gone probably a little bit longer than I thought I would do, but we've still got time for some questions.
Yep, thank you, Brian. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take some time for questions. I hope you found it interesting hearing what your peers have answered and hearing Brian's take on demand forecasting. Yeah, if you have a question, feel free to type your question into the question box in the control panel. Be aware that you will continue to stay muted. It looks like we already had a few questions come in, so go ahead and process the first questions. Also, in the meantime, feel free to keep adding your questions. If we run out of time, we will follow up with you in person to get our view on your question. All right, let's start. We had a question come in from Alex regarding technologies used in the forecasting process. What's your perspective regarding seemingly common scenario where organizations use more than one solution? For example, ERP and spreadsheets, or specialized packages and ERP.
Yeah, no, so yeah, I think it is a common solution. I think it's one born out of a degree of frustration, because no one solution is really is really delivering that magic bullet that we talked about. I think the risk there is which is the real version of the forecast. So I've been involved in lots of discussions where it's okay, whose forecast are we planning to, whose forecast are we discussing today? And I think Excel typically comes into the mix through planner frustration, because particularly with ERP bundled solutions, they can't quite get the solution to deliver what they want, so they resort to Excel. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of multiple solutions. I think one version of the truth is always better, but yeah, it is a common scenario.
Right, we'll move to the next question from Paul. Forecast error seems almost inevitable. What are some strategies to mitigate the problems caused by forecast error?
Yeah, great one. I don't know whether that came in before I got to my closing conclusions or not. So I 100% agree. It is inevitable, and I think that's almost the first, if you like, intellectual leap to make, is that the forecasts are going to be wrong. And maybe on your real fast running lines you can get that error quite small, and it's perfectly appropriate to plan against that forecast, I think. But for the vast majority of the portfolio, why on earth would you plan against a number that's got 20 to 40% error in it, which I think is where approaches such as DDMRP really come into their own then, because they respond to actual demand. So you use the forecast to effectively set the capacity you require in the supply chain, and that capacity can be production capacity or its capacity in terms of physical inventory, but then the actual replenishment of that and movement of that is driven by real demand. So you've got to find, I think you have to accept the error. You've then got to find a way to decouple the detailed planning from that forecast error.
Thank you. We'll move to a question from Rob. Rob is asking, did you investigate agility of the forecast process? In example, how quickly can the forecast be updated based on new inputs?
We didn't do, actually, and that's a really great question. So I think we discussed this internally. We actually got so much insight from this that there's another level of detail now to drill into in some of these questions. So we may well do that, and that's a really really great question to ask, to understand that how responsive can you make the forecast to changes, and if you're able to do that, what benefit does it deliver, and again see how much value there is in doing that.
All right, a question from Peter. He first starts with a comment, thanks for the insights, and then the question. Within our demand forecasting process, we face one major challenge, how to determine which articles to forecast and which not, kind of identifying risky articles. We have around 80% of articles that are new and have no historical sales at all. How to cluster them into volume versus variability, or are there any other metrics for analyzing this?
Yeah, another really good question. So, I mean, volume and variability is the obvious one, and that works in a lot of cases, and that's actually what we've built into our forecasting solution. So it creates that matrix for you based on settings around how you want to analyze volume, how you want to analyze variability. I think the variations on that I've seen work really well kind of depend on the type of products you've got, but sometimes there's a financial dimension to it as well. So for example, you might have, very, very low volume, highly variable items that typically you would then say, well, I'm not going to bother forecasting that. I'll just manage it with a stock target. But if they're extremely high value as well, then it probably says, yeah, I need to forecast them, but I can't forecast them using a traditional approach. This is going to be more almost a project management approach there because of the value involved. And sometimes there's I've seen work really effectively a physical dimension element into that matrix. So you might use cube or weight or something along those lines. So again, your volume variability may drive you down one route in terms of how much effort you put into the forecasting, but if you've got some very big cube items that consume a lot of space and therefore a lot of resource, again, you might want to apply different techniques. So I think volume variability is the best starting point, and then really it's as with most things, there's no one size fits all. It's adapt it then for the relevant parameters and features that describe your supply chain and products.
All right, very good. Conscious of the time, we'll take 2 more questions, and the rest of your questions, thanks for submitting them. We'll get back to you in person after the webinar. We'll take the question from Joop. Joop is asking, what is core strength of a demand forecasting tool over ERP or spreadsheets? Can you quantify the improvement of a tool over ERP or spreadsheet?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, I guess, because part of that depends on the complexity of the particular business. I guess from the satisfaction results from the respondents, then people clearly were more satisfied with the bespoke solution, which from my personal experience, typically a lot of that is just around user interface, manipulation capabilities, probably has more functionality around how many different levels you can manage the forecast at and disaggregate or aggregate. So it just gives you more tools at your disposal to manage and manipulate the forecast. I think spreadsheets, the second you're more than one site and more than a couple of hundred items, from a robust process point of view, a version control point of view, become extremely weak anyway.
Thanks, Brian. And then we'll end with a question from Raymond. What are your thoughts about keeping forecasts static in month for supply chain execution versus keeping it open or dynamic in the months itself?
Yeah, wow. So yeah, this could take the rest of the evening to answer. So again, it part of that depends on the agility. So the level you're forecasting at. So if you think about my proposal at the end there, where actually use forecasts more at that strategic level to what capacity do I need to set in my supply chain and drive the actual product mix using something such as DDMRP, then you really there's no requirement to be adjusting the forecast within the cycle. And I guess another dimension in there is the lead times, resupply lead times on your products. If you're not following that model and everything is driven by the forecast, you've got to be careful not to put too much noise into the supply chain or which window, which time bucket of the forecast are you going to allow to be changed. There's no point changing very near-term forecasts if you've got a longer lead time item. So that's a really short answer, but yeah, it's it's a fairly complex area. I could go on about it for hours.
All right.
Was that the final one, or were we doing one more? Was that the final one?
Let's do one more since we're on the roll. I'm gonna pick Michela. Hi, Brian. How do you see the impact on organization, if any? Do you see, for instance, the forecasting being managed by a central position and validated by local teams through S&OP process?
Yeah, really. These are really good questions, actually. So again, if you go back to the results on responsible and accountable, where we saw that it's this is still seen as a supply chain activity. So from an organizational design point of view, I think that's the first bit that kind of needs to be broken. I'm a big fan of centralizing this. So for depending on the size and scale of company, that might be centralized by business unit or big geography, or potentially total business, because it's easier to, for me, the demand forecasting process should be about getting to an unconstrained view of what the market demand is, and then we go through the rest of S&OP, IBP, whatever the process is that's deployed to then look at, okay, how can we service that demand, and what are the choices we've got to make. So I think centralization is an attractive proposition there. But again, if you've got a solution that allows you to manage the forecast at multiple levels, then that central bit can exist at a much more aggregate level, disaggregate it down to a lower level. That could be country or whatever, where you may have people closer to the customer facing element in that particular level that can then amend and adjust the forecast accordingly. So yeah, kind of all over the place a bit with that answer. A lot depends on size of organization, but I think get it out of supply chain, centralization is good and powerful. And remember, you're trying to generate an unconstrained view of demand as the starting point.
All right, thank you, Brian. Well, looking at many more incoming questions, I think there's a great appetite to talk about this topic in more detail. So we'll be giving any follow-up to that, and feel free to reach out to us. It's time to go to the wrap up. Brian, before we do so, is there any final words that you'd like to share? No,
just thanks for everyone attending. I think I glanced at the counter and it was getting close to 150, which I think is phenomenal and kind of shows that this is a hot topic and there's lots of interest in it. We're keen to learn more and listen to anyone. So the invitation is there to connect with me, get in touch, keep the discussion going.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for being here today. We really appreciate it. I saw a couple of questions coming in regarding the slide deck. Yes, you will get a link to the recording, so be on the lookout for that. We expect to send it out in the beginning of next week. In the meantime, feel free to check out our resources on our website and our latest post on our supply chain blog. And right after this webinar, I've also just sent a link to you in the chat. We would really appreciate if you could provide us with some feedback to continue to improve our webinars and make them of most use for you. Yeah, with that, we're going to close off. Thank you again for joining us today, and I'll hope to see you next time. Enjoy your day, and thanks.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Brian.